Manny Pacquiao was walking through Rizal Park on a Sunday morning, seeking a moment of peace away from the spotlight and tumult of fame. The park was quiet, with only a few early risers exercising and elderly men playing chess under the shaded trees. It was then that his eyes fixed on a solitary figure sitting on a worn bench, watching children play in the distance with a melancholic expression in his eyes. The man must have been around 70 years old, with completely white hair and a posture that mixed dignity with weariness. His clothes were simple and somewhat worn, but clean and well cared for. There was something in his slow and deliberate movements that caught Manny's attention, the way he unconsciously flexed his hands, as if still carrying the memory of knockouts from the past. Manny observed discreetly for a few minutes, noticing how the man held an old sports newspaper, its pages yellowed by time. Occasionally, he would smile sadly at something he read, shaking his head as if recalling distant times. There was a palpable loneliness around him, an aura of someone who had known glory but now lived forgotten by the world. Something in the old man's demeanor deeply touched Manny's heart. Perhaps it was the familiarity of that melancholy, the feeling that this man carried untold stories, uncelebrated victories. Manny felt an inexplicable urge to approach, as if fate had placed this encounter in his path for some special reason. Deciding to follow his intuition, Manny walked slowly toward the bench. The man looked up when he noticed his approach, and for a moment, Manny could see something familiar in that gaze, the intensity of a fighter, even if dormant with time and life's circumstances. When Manny approached, the elderly man recognized him immediately, but his reaction was one of respectful surprise, not commotion. He tried to stand up in a sign of respect, but Manny gently gestured for him to remain seated. There was something deeply humble in the way the man bowed his head in greeting, as if he didn't feel worthy of conversing with the current champion. Manny sat beside him on the bench, noticing more disturbing details about the man's appearance. His hands, though trembling slightly with age, still showed old calluses from years of training on heavy bags. His ears had the characteristic deformation of veteran boxers, and small scars around his eyes told stories of epic battles in the ring. The newspaper the man held was from 1975, and Manny could see a featured photo on the sports page, a young Filipino boxer raising his arms in victory after a fight. Something in that image made Manny look more carefully at the face of the elderly man beside him, trying to see through the wrinkles and years that had passed. It was then that the realization hit Manny like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just any elderly man. Those features, even aged, were unmistakable. The eyes that shone with determination in the newspaper photo were the same ones now looking at him with a mixture of admiration and resignation. Manny was sitting next to Arsenio Iron Fists Santos, a true legend of Filipino boxing. The shock of recognition left Manny momentarily speechless. Arsenio Santos had been the first Filipino to conquer a world title, paving the way for future generations of boxers, including Manny himself. How was it possible that such a legend was there, alone and apparently forgotten, on a park bench? Arsenio Santos had been more than a champion. He had been a symbol of hope for Filipinos in the 70s. His devastating fists and refined technique took him to the top of the middleweight boxing world, defending his title in epic fights that stopped the entire country. Each of his victories was a victory for all of the Philippines, each title defense a source of national pride. Manny vaguely remembered the stories his father told about Arsenio Santos, about how he had put Filipino boxing on the world map long before the modern era. It was Arsenio who had inspired an entire generation of young Filipinos to dream of the international ring. His fights were broadcast on radio and television, bringing entire families together around the sets to cheer for the national hero. During his years of glory, Arsenio had accumulated considerable fortune, built a business empire, and became one of the most respected men in the country. His fights generated millions, his endorsements moved the national market, and his fame transcended sport. Politicians courted him, businessmen sought his partnership, and the Filipino people loved him unconditionally. But like many sports legends, Arsenio had trusted the wrong people. Dishonest promoters, unscrupulous businessmen, and even greedy family members had systematically drained his fortune while he was still at the peak of his career. His companies went bankrupt due to mismanagement, his investments proved fraudulent, and his contracts revealed themselves to be financial traps. The fall had been as sudden as his rise. A surprising defeat at the end of his career, followed by a series of financial scandals, and Arsenio Santos saw his empire crumble like a house of cards. In a matter of years, he went from respected millionaire to a common man struggling to survive, forgotten by the same public that had once idolized him. For the past 20 years, Arsenio had lived modestly in a small apartment in Manila's suburbs, sustaining himself with a minimal government pension and occasional informal work. His wife had died 10 years ago, and his children, ashamed of the financial scandals of the past, maintained little contact with him. Loneliness had become his most faithful companion. Arsenio's health was deteriorating. Decades of punches to the head had left neurological aftereffects, causing tremors in his hands and occasional memory problems. His feet ached constantly due to years of intense training, and an old injury in his right shoulder limited his movements. He visited the park every day not just to exercise, but to escape the suffocating loneliness of his empty apartment. Manny observed how Arsenio tried to hide his condition, maintaining upright posture despite the pain, speaking eloquently despite occasional pauses to organize his thoughts. There was an unbreakable pride in this man who refused to be seen as an object of pity, even when he clearly needed help. His clothes were old but impeccable, his shoes worn but polished with care. What most touched Manny was realizing that Arsenio still carried that 1975 newspaper, the only tangible proof that he had once been someone important. It was as if that yellowed page was the anchor that connected him to his champion identity, preventing him from becoming completely lost in the insignificance of the present. While they talked about trivial matters, Manny could feel the immense sadness that Arsenio carried. It wasn't just sadness for lost glory or current poverty, but the deep pain of being forgotten by the same people who had once considered him a hero. Arsenio wasn't seeking pity or help. He was seeking only recognition that his life had had meaning. Manny spent the next hours listening to Arsenio tell stories of the past, each one revealing more about the greatness that had been lost and the dignity that remained intact. He saw much of himself in that man, the same passion for boxing, the same national representation, the same responsibility of carrying a people's hopes on his shoulders. As the day progressed, Manny made a decision that arose from the depths of his heart. Arsenio Santos didn't deserve the oblivion he had fallen into. This man had opened doors so that boxers like Manny could dream, had carried the Filipino flag with honor before the world even knew the country's pugilistic potential. Manny realized that his success, in part, was due to the path blazed by men like Arsenio. Each of his knockouts, each title conquered, each acclaim received was built upon the foundations established by pioneers like Iron Fists. It was not just a right, but a moral responsibility to honor those who came before. Manny's initial idea was simple but powerful. Arsenio Santos needed to be remembered not as a broken man at the end of life, but as the legend he had always been. It wasn't about charity, but about justice. It wasn't about giving money to someone in need, but about restoring the dignity of a forgotten hero. That afternoon in the park, Manny made the decision that would change not only Arsenio's life, but also his own understanding of legacy and responsibility. He didn't know exactly how, but he was determined to ensure that Arsenio Santos would return to occupy the place he deserved in Filipino boxing history and in the people's hearts. In the following weeks, Manny worked discreetly to orchestrate Arsenio Santos' return to the national scene. He began contacting sports historians, veteran journalists, and documentarians, sharing the forgotten story of the first Filipino world champion. The response was one of shock and collective shame. How had they allowed such a legend to fall into oblivion? Manny organized a special event at the gym where Arsenio had trained in his days of glory. He invited other famous boxers, sports personalities, and the national press. Arsenio, initially reluctant to accept any form of attention, finally agreed when Manny explained that it wasn't about charity, but about well-deserved and overdue recognition. The preparation for the event revealed incredible stories about Arsenio that had been lost in time. Former training partners emerged from all corners, sharing memories of his dedication and charisma. Journalists discovered that Arsenio had silently donated part of his fortune to boxing schools in poor communities, a fact he had never made public. On the day of the event, something magical happened. When Arsenio entered the gym, the crowd rose in ovation. Many of those present were too young to have seen his fights, but all had heard the legends. Seeing the real man, with his honorable scars and unshakable dignity, moved even the most skeptical. Manny presented a special documentary about Arsenio's life, revealing not only his achievements in the ring, but also his character outside it. Rare images of his fights, interviews with contemporaries, and testimonials from people who had been impacted by his generosity painted the portrait of a true champion. The event was just the beginning of a complete transformation in Arsenio's life. Manny established a foundation in the veteran champion's name, focused on supporting young Filipino boxers and preserving the sport's history in the country. Arsenio was named honorary president, finally having a renewed purpose in his days. Publishers became interested in publishing Arsenio's autobiography, with Manny offering total support for the project. The book became a bestseller, not just for its exciting stories of victories and defeats, but for the life lesson about resilience and dignity in adversity. The royalties guaranteed financial security for the ex-champion's final years. The national television network offered Arsenio a weekly boxing program, where he analyzed fights and guided young talents. His vast experience and eloquent way of speaking made the program an instant success. Arsenio rediscovered the passion for teaching and inspiring the new generation, feeling useful and valued again. Manny provided first-class medical treatment for Arsenio, alleviating many of the health problems that afflicted him. Physical therapists specialized in boxing injuries helped improve his mobility, while neurologists worked to control the tremors that bothered him. Arsenio not only felt better physically, but recovered his mental vitality. Most importantly was the restoration of family bonds. Inspired by the patriarch's renewed fame and ashamed for having abandoned him, Arsenio's children reconnected. The family reunited, and Arsenio finally got to meet grandchildren who barely knew of his existence. The house that once echoed with loneliness now resonated with laughter and warm conversations. 1 year after that casual encounter in the park, Arsenio Santos had become not just a respected figure again, but a symbol of how true talent and character never completely die. His story inspired a new generation of boxers to value not just achievements in the ring, but also the legacy they would leave behind. Manny and Arsenio developed a deep friendship that transcended generations. Arsenio became an informal mentor to Manny, offering perspectives on career, fame, and life that only someone who had been through everything could give. Manny found in Arsenio not just a hero from his youth, but an example of how to face life's challenges with grace. The gym where Arsenio trained was renovated and transformed into an elite training center, with an entire wing dedicated to his memory. Young boxers from all over the country came not just to train on modern equipment, but to hear the stories and advice of the man who had paved the way for them all. Arsenio established an annual scholarship for talented young boxers from poor families, ensuring that no future champion would lose opportunities due to lack of resources. Each scholarship recipient carried with them not just financial support, but also the inspiration from Arsenio's story of overcoming challenges. What Manny had done for Arsenio Santos was more than restoring the dignity of a forgotten man. It was creating a model of how current champions should honor those who came before. The story became living legend, proving that true heroes don't just conquer titles, but also lift up other fallen fighters. Arsenio lived his final years knowing that his life had mattered, that his legacy was secure, and that a young champion's decision in the park had changed not just his life, but touched the heart of an entire nation. The casual encounter had transformed into an eternal lesson about memory, respect, and responsibility that would echo through generations. If you like this kind of story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos.